Hey guys, this is Hard Time Strongman, and today we're talking radio communications, specifically civilian communications in EMCOMM and TACCOMM. EMCOMM being emergency communication, and TACCOMM being tactical communication. References for today: we are basing this off of our experience. We're going to try to apply what we learned and how we operated in the military and tailor that to civilian prepared individuals.
The whole reason we're doing this, the whole reason we're doing this is because we were approached by Civil Sentinel, and he was wanting to do a few posts on EMCOMM and TACCOMM, and wanted our perspective on this as we dealt with it in the military and how that could be transferred to the civilian context. So that's why we're here today, and that's what we're going to push out to you guys.
Yep. His channel will be in the description. Check him out. He's putting out excellent information. And every little bit helps, guys. We're all pushing to the same goal to make everyone better and to, raise the standard. So,
So let's roll into this.
Yeah. So why radio communication? In my mind, radio communication is like NODs or thermals, night vision or thermal imaging. It's a superpower. It's allowing you to broaden your communication from face to face or line of sight to the near infinite of functional communication. You have guys who are utilizing ham radio in their garage, and they're able to communicate to someone on a different continent. So if you're thinking of this in the confines of emergency communication or tactical communication, it's incredible. It is such a force multiplier, and it can bridge the gap, and it makes everything possible from emergency fire response, emergency medical response, to to establishing base of fire movement, calling in fire, QRF, everything.
Doing recon patrols, exactly. And you still may be thinking, well, why do I care about this? Well, think about this. So what happens, because this happened before, this has happened many times. Think 9/11, think several other times when the cell phone grid has gone down and you can't get in to talk to people. What are you going to do? Well, as I like to call them, normies, they're just going to sit there and cry in a corner and, hug themselves. But the rest of us who maybe are sitting on a man pack, a Baofeng, or a ham radio, we can still talk to each other. We can still communicate with emergency services. We can still communicate with anyone outside of our home with relative ease. So that's why. That's the majority of why.
I mean, it's incredibly important. So not even tactically, but think about emergency communication. So past the winter, okay, the freeze, Snowmageddon in Texas. All right. Personally, my power is knocked out for 4 days in 3-degree weather. So I was going out every day to collect and chop firewood. I was going out to my neighbors in my little cul-de-sac to check on my elderly neighbors. But if my whole neighborhood had, a pack of Baofengs set up, had radio communications set up, you wouldn't have to, go out. You could mitigate risk in, checking on your people. I mean, just in Florida, you just went through a hurricane.
Oh, yeah.
Where, say if your power got knocked out, or, cell towers went down or whatever, and you were, in a bind, you'd be able to kick on a radio and check in with the National Weather Service, check in on local emergency, personnel, get an idea, more situational awareness on what's going on. If you need to call for help, you call for help.
Yep.
All these things are available to us just in the background.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of foolish not to, it is really foolish not to have that capability when it's so easy right now. Let's kind of dig into our experience with the military. So this, of course, was in, mainly focusing on the TACCOM and the tactical sphere of communication. But you were the RTO. How was our communication set up? Just at the platoon level, what you were working with.
So at the platoon level, it was fairly simple. There was only a handful of people who actually had radios. Normally, you would roll with your squad net, your platoon net, your QRF or fires.
What do you mean by net?
Maybe the JTAC. If we had air assets, we maybe had a JTAC net. So that was. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Explain what you meant by net. Like when you say net,
So
what do you mean?
when I say net, I mean it's a frequency. It's just a frequency that we operate on, much like the civilian radios now. We just declared that as a net. It's much easier to say a net than it is a frequency. You know, in the military, you try to get things out as quick and concise as possible. So saying net as opposed to frequency, everybody knows what you're talking about, and you get the point across real quick.
So the idea behind establishing different nets is we all use the same radios, pretty much. We all had access to these frequencies, but if you're working with larger organizations, you can say, okay, this squad uses this net, or this platoon uses this net. So you know that if you click over to this channel that you've pre-programmed into your radio, you will hear this platoon. So you can have a platoon net. You can have a headquarters net if you need to relay if you have a casualty. As the situation develops, putting out sit reps or salute reports. You could have a QRF net in case you needed help. You could have, medevac, like you said, fires. Everyone has access to that. So you're compartmentalizing all these different spheres, and it makes that spiral web of communication, but it clears up the net from having, one just giant frequency that everyone's on and you aren't able to communicate.
Right, and that also comes down to something I told you earlier in pre-production, which was the more people that you have in your organization, the less people need to be talking on the net.
Awesome.
So if you have 200 people in your company or 200 people in your group, how many of those people do you want on the radio at one time? Well, your leaders. That's about it. Your leaders, maybe your weapons squad.
And that's how we ran it. So you had, in your squads, only the squad leader had a radio.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else you were relying on verbal, hand signs, whatever, but only the squad leader needed the radio. Like you said, it keeps numbers down, keeps everything more concise. Which
that actually kind of chased me a little bit, is why you guys only stopped with squad leaders having it, because in my mind I would limit it to. I would also include team leaders in that, just because they have to maneuver as well. They have to relay information, and you're not going to send a runner out to your squad leader so that he can relay it up. So I would,
exactly.
In my opinion, in my structure, I know when I rolled with first platoon, when I rolled with headquarters, when I rolled with second, I didn't really roll with you guys too much. When I rolled with those guys, I do believe their team leaders had radios. Mm-hmm. So kind of blows my mind that you guys in third platoon didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have, like, you saw, we never used them, but you saw the little soldier radios, right?
Yeah.
The little low powered. I would have loved to have one of those. I probably wouldn't have ran around with an embedder or anything, but I would love to have that extra capability, because that would make things so much easier. And that's something we can talk about in a future episode on, like an R&D kind of like establishing RSOPs for like like if we were to set up teams and squads, like what we would make that look like.
Right.
But yeah, I think that would definitely be. I think that's definitely the way to go.
Yeah.
And you touched on
earlier.
Talking
talking about that is not this time. What's up?
Not this time. No, I was just saying what we talked about in the pre-show, but how we had everything run in the military. So you had your handheld radios, squad leader and up. Your RTOs had man packs, so larger radios, kind of bridge the gap between handhelds and vehicle-borne or like HQ-borne radios. And then you had the your vehicle radios that had a stupid amount of power.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a difference too, because as an RTO with my man pack, it was the same radio that was in the vehicles, but it had less power because I was dealing with the battery that was attached to it, whereas the vehicle-borne radios were attached to the actual vehicle's battery,
right?
And had all of their the infrastructure within the vehicle to be able to push a signal out a lot farther. So it had more power; it could reach further. So as an RTO, I was just bridging the gap between the embedders or the handheld radios that we had with the squad level and the vehicle-borne radios, because most of the time as an RTO, I was rolling with the CO, or I was rolling with our recon element, and I would establish at a high point while others were down in, like, say, a valley. If they were operating down there, I would go to a high point and establish, like, near the peak of a mountain, and relay information as it came in.
Right.
Because a lot of times when people were talking on handhelds, they could not hear it back in operations.
Mm-hmm.
So it would relay through me, and I would relay to operations. So that's the big difference between the radios that we were using. So we had the handhelds, the emitters, the band packs, which were the Harris radios, and the vehicle-borne radios, which were also the Harris radios, but they had a crap ton more power.
Yeah, when you think of military communications, you have to keep in mind that the military has an insane network, an insane infrastructure that it can rely on. Nigh infinite resources. So everything is interconnected. The squad leader is connected to the platoon sergeant, who's connected to the RTO, who's connected to the headquarters element, who's connected to fires, QRF, an entirely different element on the other side of the continent. Doesn't matter. Every is such a spider web of communication, and you have to think that when you're thinking of this in the military context, yes, makes sense, perfect. Of course they need to be able to do that. When you think of it in a civilian context, you don't have the infrastructure that the military has. You don't have the resources that the military has. So you need to, take your pros and cons, and you have to apply. You can apply these concepts to your situation, what you can do. So, what could a handheld look like? I love that people are getting more into what am I trying to say? Encryption, but not everyone's going to have that capability right off the bat. I love that people are getting into man packs, and I think that's a great resource and a great capability. So maybe establish that in your squad. But you need to figure out who needs a radio. You need to figure out how many radios you're going to use. If you need a man pack, how do you use your vehicles, or potentially your homes or other outposts to that end, and how you can establish that. Not everyone's going to have the same radio.
Right. And also one of the really cool things that I'm seeing people doing is making use of repeaters and making use of homemade repeaters. Awesome. So people are taking, like, man packs with solar power chargers in duffel bags or in, like, tough boxes with radio antennas, dropping them off and setting them up at the top of, like, huge hills or mountains, and using those as repeaters.
I've seen a guy hook up two Baofangs together, and he made a repeater. I mean, yeah, it's crazy what people can do, and I love that when people get fired up about communication, that they're innovative. They can innovate when the military a lot of the time cannot because of all the red tape. But I love where we're going with this. But sorry, just to kind of refocus us. So pros and cons with our experience in the military. So common issues that we experienced working in the Army with radios. So something called zeroizing your radio. So radio, you program all of your frequencies, all your channels, all your nets, good to go. If you did not change the battery on your handheld radio in a very specific way, you would lose all those frequencies. They'd be gone. And that's a safety consideration. That's a security consideration when they developed the radio. But if you're in the middle of a field problem, in the middle of a field exercise, and you zeroize your squad leader's radio, you're in a pretty rough way. He's not going to be happy. Yeah, so that your RTO is going to have to come over. He's going to have to keyload all those frequencies again, and that's time that you're wasting. But the issue that I had with that is that it happens so often.
It
happened.
Yeah, if you're not careful, it's so easy to do.
Well, it happened every time we went out. Every single time we went out, someone would zeroize the radio when they weren't supposed to. So zeroizing the radio with the power change, battery life was atrocious.
Oh my God!
I mean, I was talking to you. The way that we ran our squad, we literally had everybody, like every team member, was carrying more batteries.
Yeah.
Depending on how long we were out. You know,
Yeah.
in my mind, there's no reason why you should have to have like 5-10 batteries for one radio. That's kind of crazy to me. But it was necessary at the time. It made sense. Of course, you're going to do it if you need to do it. But that was a huge drawback in my mind.
Well, that's the con, definitely, for the military radios. Whereas in the civilian context, you have these Baofengs or what have you with these extended batteries. Where, I mean, you saw mine. I charged that thing the first day I got it, and I didn't touch it again for 3 months.
Yeah.
And I turned it back on, and holy crap, it still had full charge for 3 months. Mm-hmm. Even if I used it a few times, actually, now that I think back on it, but even if I was using it every day, it would last a lot longer than one battery would for the military radio. And that's the thing, though, is because the military radios also draw a lot more power, but they still have the same capability to a point that these Baofengs do. Granted, in some contexts, the military radios have way more capability, way more reach than the Baofengs will without help. Mm-hmm. So that's the main drawback.
And just as an aside, guys, we're going to be referencing Baofengs. One, because that's what we're currently using until we can upgrade to better radios. Two, because it is such an affordable and widespread option that a lot of people are starting in ham radio with Baofengs. So we're trying to draw people in, trying to use the context and application that people will understand. But another thing along with battery life is in civilian world with radios, you can solar charge your radios, your batteries. Yeah. I mean, so you could potentially have strap a solar panel onto your ruck, constantly having a battery charging if you need it, and change that out every night. And with the Baofeng UV5R, doesn't matter how many times you change your battery, you're never going to zeroize the radio unless if you reset it manually. So that's a pretty cool
That's the big thing too. Those Baofengs with these civilian radios, you have to try to zeroize these things, and even then, it's a multi-step process. Mm-hmm. With those military radios, you can just pull the battery and it's done.
Yeah,
like literally, you uncouple that battery and it's zeroed. It's done.
It's gone.
You need a dagger to.
And once again, that's a security thing, but your mileage may vary, and not just in the military context, but civilian context too. Common user errors. I call audio clipping. It's just not keying your radio. So to properly use your radio, you key your push to talk, you wait a little bit, you start talking, you finish what you're saying, and then you release the push to talk. You release the key. A lot of guys, they'll just start talking, click it when they're halfway through, trying to say what they're trying to say, and you get half the message. So not properly utilizing the radio.
That's just being lazy.
Yeah. Hot micing is another thing. So after your transmission is over, keeping your key mic'd, and then you're saying what you don't want to say on the radio. You're taking up the net. No one else can talk during that time. Yeah. Failed radio etiquette, right? Dead push to talks all the time. Squad leader, RTO, vehicle would go talk. They hit their push to talk, nothing would happen. So not taking care of your equipment. And then we touched on that earlier, not bringing enough batteries. if you don't have power, you can't talk. So.
And this is why my pack was always like 70 plus pounds. Goodness. I had to bring enough batteries for me. I had to bring extra batteries for other dudes. It was not a fun experience.
No.
I mean, it was fun, just, not for the context of, hey, I want to go out with a 90 plus pound pack.
Yeah, just not the
Screw
best.
That noise. Yeah. Not what you want to be doing.
No.
So that was TACCOMM. That brings us into EMCOMM, so emergency communication. In the military, we never really had to use this. There was never a situation where we had to deal with tornado, wildfire, hurricane, tsunami, flooding.
But we were also big
radioactive Army. Dust storm, whatever. But yeah, we were also big Army. We had our network was massive. Our logistics were massive. It didn't take much. But
also that Sorry, I'm just saying that wasn't our context, right? So National Guard.
Right, exactly. But there was never a time where we had to use EMCOMM to help ourselves either. So there was, even still, we still had the same nets that we did before, and those would, you would get on the horn and talk to fire. You could talk to EMS or doc. You could talk to Jesus. You could talk to CID if you really wanted to. Nobody really wanted to, but you could.
Rats get fat.
Yeah, exactly. Snitches get stitches. So even then, you still have different frequencies or nets. You in a civilian context, you're calling as dispatch. Dispatch is talking to ground contacts. Ground contacts are talking back to dispatch. Dispatch is communicating to hospitals, or even ground contacts are talking to the hospitals. There's a variety of nets. Everybody's still communicating via radio. They're not picking up their cell phone and be like, "Hey, what's up, man? I'm coming into the hospital. I'm transporting somebody who's got a gunshot wound to the chest." No. They're pulling out their freaking CB radio in the thing and communicating.
I mean, this, and once again, it goes to just how prevalent it is in our country, right? In Western civilization, right? I mean, hell, cart pushers in Walmart have radios. Like
That's true.
They are everywhere. When you think locomotives, so train conductors, when you think airliners, when you think taxi. I mean, everybody uses radios.
Yep.
So comm requirements, so communication requirements for what we experienced in the military. Everything was encrypted. Everything was encrypted.
Yep.
All of our equipment was, to a point, robust.
Mm-hmm.
And inherently we had that that spider web, that really robust network where everything was interconnected.
Right. Whereas, if you're a civilian, you don't really have those. I mean, you can have encryption. Like it's entirely possible to encrypt these Baofengs. If you're not listening on the right encryption, all you're going to hear is really static and some broken English.
Mm-hmm.
The main thing about the civilian, comm requirements though is they got to be affordable and they have to be procurable.
Right.
You have to be able to go on Amazon and pick up a Baofeng or whatever model radio you want and be able to get that thing. You have to be able to still have robust equipment.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to be able to be able to procure enough equipment for everyone to be able to talk on the same network.
Right, and that's the big thing is when we were in the Army, everything was issued to you, right?
Yep.
It was already there. Hey, your squad's using this. Blah. Mm-hmm. There you go. But when you're outfitting yourself, you could have the best radio on the planet, but if you can only buy one and then no one else has a radio, that's not useful, right? So you need to be able to ideally procure the same radio for everyone. If not, the great thing about radio is that as long as you're able to hear and transmit on the same frequency, you're good to go. Simplex radio, blah, do your thing.
Yep.
Yep. I am really proud of the community for getting more into encryption and establishing that and trying to establish that as a baseline. That's of course a lot safer for what we're trying to do here. There are a lot of requirements for that though. You can't really effectively encrypt a Baofeng, at least not well, without really cutting down on a lot of things. But if you're trying to encrypt, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be getting into digital and setting up the software and everything involved. I'm not privy on that. I haven't explored that yet, but
we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean we'll get there. But like you said, needs to be robust because you're going to be banging around a lot. Another thing that I just thought of is it has to be replaceable, right? So affordable and procurable, but you need to expect to break your things, right? So if you can, yeah, exactly, right? So last field problem that we went on, you went ahead and broke your antenna and your Baofeng all in one.
Yeah.
So it's great to have redundancies and secondary, tertiary radios in place if you can, and then flexible options for charging. So I put that down as a requirement because you may not be able to come back to a wall-mounted station at the end of the day and charge your charge your radio. So being able to hook your radio up to an inverter into solar power, what have you, is definitely a requirement for what we want to do here.
Especially if you're establishing a base camp out in the wilderness, you have got to, if you can't charge your batteries on the run with like a solar panel, at least be able to come back to like your base camp where you would have a setup where you could be able to charge your batteries again with a solar panel. That is 100% a necessity, because you're not going to be hauling a generator out there with an extension cord to plug in a wall-mounted thing to charge your stuff. Like, logistically, it's just not feasible.
Right.
So, definitely carry a solar charger. Which, good Lord, I wish we would have been able to do that in the military, but we couldn't. Screw those 2-day ops, right? So, along with these requirements, you may have something you may want to consider as far as equipment goes. Especially with emergency comms, you're going to be looking for repeaters. Your area may actually have a bunch of repeaters already established in your area that are tuned to different frequencies that you can just piggyback on to communicate with EMS, fire, police, military, what have you. Be very careful, though, when doing this, especially communicating with these organizations, especially the military, because you could be committing an FCC violation if you're not in an actual emergency, or if you're not in a situation where you need to be talking to the military, which honestly, there's never really a reason for you to be doing that, except if, World War Z is happening and, you got to get Brad Pitt down here to fight some zombies.
What you're saying with hopping on and, talking with these different emergency services. So your lowly Baofeng has 200 plus channels that you can, program. So you can now, while we still have internet and electrical power, you can hop on the internet and you can search for frequencies for your specific emergency frequencies in your area.
Mm-hmm.
So you can type in your sheriff's office, your local police department, your local fire, the National Weather Service. You can program all these channels into your radio, and that just increases your situational awareness, right? A couple just apps that I want to put out for this episode: Repeater Book and EchoLink, specifically for radio. So Repeater Book, you type in your zip code or your town or just your location, and it'll give you a list of repeaters in your area, their frequencies, their offset codes, everything.
Yeah.
And then EchoLink, I haven't utilized it yet, but the idea is EchoLink links repeaters together. So in theory, you could, your range could explode for how far you could communicate. But, just like you said, being able to utilize repeaters in your area, especially if you're traveling, being able to know what repeaters in the area, where they are, how strong they are, all of that is a huge resource.
Yep. And along with that, especially in emergencies, take into consideration, can you, or really how can you outfit your community? We talked about that a little bit. That could be as simple as, giving someone a small case, and inside of that case is a couple batteries, a Baofeng that's already pre-programmed, a wall charger, and maybe a frequency book of like frequencies in the area. Like it can be that simple. And then
it could even be more simple than that. I mean, you could go to Walmart and buy a blister pack of radios. Yeah. And that would let you be able to communicate with your little cul-de-sac if you didn't want to, leave your home.
Oh yeah. Especially in like my situation where you had the Great Freeze and I had, Hurricane Ian. Like I could check it in we could check it in on all of our neighbors and not have to leave the safety of our own home.
Well, and even during the hurricane, right? So if you start getting crazy wind, crazy, hail, rain, whatever, being able to, check on your neighbors while you're in a safe location, that's huge.
Also, keep in mind whether or not it would be viable for you to be using handhelds or man packs or mobile units in your vehicles or even your home units. So a ham radio, like what is going to best fit your situation, your organization, your infrastructure, etc. Another thing you need to probably write down would be Aries, which is what, again?
Yeah, sorry. So Aries is, maybe we'll cut out all these pauses here. But ARES is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. So it's a volunteer service of ham radio operators that respond to natural disasters, for a given area and provide that network, that communication that could get knocked out by a natural disaster. So those are guys that volunteer to go and help aid in the event of hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever, and provide that basic communication for emergency service and just community members.
And that's not active all the time, right? That only pops up when it's like emergency situations.
Right. Yeah. So they volunteer for emergency services. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, with that leads us into TACCOM. As far as considerations go, you're going to want to have push to talk, so you can go all high speed as much as throat mics. Oh, good Lord, what were those huge earmuffs?
What are you talking about, like Peltors?
Yeah, Peltors.
Oh, I'd do that 100%. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So, well, yeah. So Peltors, or I don't remember any other brands, but you're bridging the gap between ear protection and you're hooking your comms up to it. Why wouldn't you? I mean, it's awesome.
Those are 3M, by the way, the brand.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, personally, when I rolled with just an earpiece. I rolled with an earpiece, and I had a
little push talk.
Oh my god, a push talk mic. That was it.
Yeah.
I kept it simple. It was easy.
I definitely do the Peltors or an equivalent just to cut down on what you need to carry. I had them.
That's fair.
Yeah, I had them issued to me for a few months. I love those things. They were great.
But
so if you don't have any
context,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, but in a civilian context, you probably wouldn't have. You might not have the funds to just go out and buy a set of Peltors because they are fairly expensive, if I remember right.
Yeah, they are. But we're going into just considerations what we would.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Well, as far as TACCOM goes, yeah, I would rock Peltors, at least from the perspective that you put out, to just not have to worry about exactly what all you're going to have to carry extra. I mean, in my case, I would have an extra push-to-talk mic. I would have an actual, telephone-looking handset that I would carry with me just in case, too. Just in case all that stuff would go out, I would have to drop bag, unhook my mic, unhook my earbud, and hook this thing in and hope to God the wires weren't messed up. And just that would be my emergency backup for that. You still also have to take into consideration ear pro, which with the Peltors you negate that, but you're still going to have to. If you're talking during a firefight, you can't really hear too much if you're close to it, and everybody's firing around you. You are not going to hear anything coming over that radio. You're going to have to crank that sucker up loud and jam that earpiece deep into your canal.
So deep. So other considerations for TACCOM. So encryption. If you don't have encryption built into your radio and you're not using in your radio, there are ways around this, right? That you can still communicate securely, but not having that software available. So a very easy method is utilizing encryption tables. So having a little laminated card with, say, numeric or alphabetical, rows and columns, and each combination equaling a phrase or a letter or what have you, establishing that beforehand so that when you're putting that over the net, if someone isn't in your group, anyone can listen in, they won't know what you're saying.
Exactly.
Right? Utilizing good ComSec, so utilizing call signs, never using your real names or real names over the radio. All right, utilizing things like phase lines, TRPs, or target reference points, different brevity codes. So the idea is that, and that's what we did even in the military, even when we had encryption available and we were using it all the time, you still use these ComSec, these tenants, foundations,
protections,
right?
Yeah.
In order to safeguard the information you're putting out, because you should always treat radio as if you're putting whatever you're saying out in the open. You should always assume that you're being listened to. So
100%, 100%. And that's also why we encourage that you move locations between transmissions, especially if you don't have encryption. Because as we've seen in Ukraine, if you sit there and you keep keying your mic and you keep transmitting, they're going to be able to back azimuth that right onto your location.
Mm-hmm. Another really great way to protect yourself specifically from being direction found is utilizing, one, low power. You should be using the lowest power setting that you can in order to effectively communicate. That helps out a lot. Because if you're half a mile away from somebody and you're blasting out full power, that's not best practice, right? Because then you're putting your frequency out for everybody to see. So utilizing low power, and we want to get into this, but people like Civil Sentinel, other channels that are really pushing comm knowledge, using directional antennas. So not just using an omnidirectional antenna where you're blasting out 360 degrees, whoever wants to listen to you can, but utilizing a focused beam of signal that only if you're in that what am I trying to say, radius, that line of sight, essentially, that's the only way you can hear what you're putting out. So that's a huge
advantage
to putting out that information and trying to keep that secure. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into radio usage, just good practice. So like you said earlier, the more people you have, the less people need to be talking. Don't flood the net.
Yeah.
Okay. So your transmissions need to be short. They need to be concise. They need to pervade the information you're trying to put out. Nothing more.
Use ComSec. Use OPSEC.
Everything. So
only necessary information goes out.
So radio usage, best practice. Do establish your SOPs prior to your deployment or your radio usage. All right. Get with your group. Establish what you're going to do and how you're going to do it before things happen, before you have to use your radios. Okay. Establish and utilize call signs for personnel. So, me, this is you. Instead of using your name or my name over the radio, hey, 1, this is 2. Or Fox, this is Bear. Whatever you decide, have that in your SOPs. Utilize it. Don't stray from it. Set and communicate phase lines, target reference points, and brevity codes. So
this eliminates the need to actually say your location or where you're going or whatever you're going to be, like if you're in a tactical situation, whatever you're going to be tacking. Like it's so much easier, especially if you're communicating with other assets such as air assets or police or fire or whatever. If they have a copy of those TRPs and you mention, hey, we're in building 24, we're moving to building 67, meet us there. They know exactly where you're going and how long it's going to take you to get there.
Exactly. So to do this, that requires you to have a map and know how to use it. This requires all of your guys looking at the same picture and setting up, hey, this is building 2, this is building 5, this is phase line Bravo. Sorry, for brevity, a phase line is a line drawn across your AO, your area of operations, and saying, hey, once we hit this line, once we pass this location, this is going to happen. So you don't have to communicate that. So once you know that you're past a certain point, then different actions can take place.
Right. And you may have seen this in like movies such as Lone Survivor when they were talking about passing phase line. What was it? Budweiser, or they call it Budweiser, whatever. They were talking about a phase line within their operation as they were doing their movement. They were talking like, hey, we're passing this. This is our location. So you say this and people know exactly what phase of operation you're in and what location you're at.
Right. So TRPs, or target reference points, this is really great in the defense. So if you're set up in a, say in a tower or whatever point, and you set up, hey, so this is TRP 1. So that tree over there, TRP 1. That boulder, TRP 2. Barn, TRP 3. So if you're tracking enemies or you're searching for enemies, you can call out TRP2 and everyone knows exactly where to look, especially if you're shifting fire or conducting movements, anything like that. It breaks down time so much that you can be focusing on other things, and it just makes everything really clear. You're not wondering, oh, what barn, oh, what building. That was already established well before you started. So really excellent tool. And then just brevity codes. It cuts down time on the net, and it's another layer of security.
Yep.
So one example of that. So what popular culture? Angel has fallen. The birds left the nest. Any code words or code phrases that you can think of, that's a brevity code. So
havoc in the blind. Yeah.
Right. So it's designed so that you can say something over the net, free and clear, and you don't have to worry about someone knowing what that means.
Yep. And then also make sure you're utilizing encryption tables, especially for sensitive information. You don't want that stuff getting out over the net, because once you do, and that's in someone else's hands, that is bad news bears.
A really great reference for encryption tables, you can find it on Red Bear Tactical on IG. They have a really great reference for that.
Yeah.
And comm windows. So utilizing comm windows when you have a break in communication, setting up these SOPs, knowing that, okay, if I lose contact with my group, I know that they're going to be on the net at this, and this time. I know that someone's listening here, so I can put out, my, distress call, what have you, at this time. I know someone's listening. This also allows you to be able to turn off your radio and save battery. Mm-hmm. If you know that someone's going to be listening at this time, you don't have to be on the net. So that's a really great tool to use.
Yep. Also, make sure you're practicing good CommSec. We're not going to go over this again. We've already hit this en masse. So practice good CommSec. Make sure you're moving locations between your transmissions. That way that the enemy can't key in on where you are. Mm-hmm. And assume, above all else, even if you have encryption, assume that someone is listening in.
Assume that someone is listening to you. Always.
Yes. Always. So don't use names. Don't use locations. Do not describe in detail literally anything that you're seeing. If you have to, dear God, I hope you have some form of encryption. Because if someone hears that, they know exactly, they can tell exactly where you are based on what you're seeing and what you're describing.
Even if you have encryption, always utilize CommSec. CommSec is free. And even if you have the best encryption in the world, if your adversary has captured one of your radios, your encryption doesn't matter anymore.
You're done. Yep.
So always assume that someone's listening in, even if they're not. It's free. It makes you all that much more secure. So
one fun thing to piggyback off of what you're talking about, losing a radio. If you lose a radio and somebody gets a hold of the encryption, guess what has to change? Everyone's encryption. And I don't mean in your area. I mean everyone's encryption has to be changed.
CommSec ain't no joke. Don't describe in detail what you're seeing or what you're doing. Don't drop mission details. Don't give your coordinates over the net.
Right. Don't sit there and hot mic.
Yeah.
Don't be a dick. Don't be a dick. Don't hot mic. Come on. Use common sense. Don't stay on the radio for prolonged periods of time. Don't sit there and tell your life story over the radio.
And once again, don't assume that no one's listening to you, because you should be assuming that everyone's listening to you. So let's run into some scenario training of what we can, just applications for radio usage. So specifically for emergency communications, a natural disaster strikes your town or your area of operation. Your group members need to be able to communicate their status, their locations, coordinate movement, and request for assistance. So what are the ranges of each member's radio? Do you have assets like man packs, like mobile units, like home stations? Can your members rely on the capability of their radio, or do they rely on repeaters? How long will their radio batteries last without a charge? Can your group charge their radios off the grid?
God, I hope so. I would hope you'd have some sort of solar capability to recharge your batteries.
So think of a natural disaster, right? So, let's say I'm out of suburbia. Let's say I'm on my land with, my buddies, right? Natural disaster happens. We no longer have cell contact. So can my radio reach to my other buddy's home? Can my radio talk to his radio without me having to move? That's huge. Okay. Say if I'm out, say if I'm out to town, or I'm out in, a field, whatever, and I'm away from my home. If I'm away from my home station, my home unit, right? So what is my radio status then? Do I have multiple radios? Do I have a radio on me in my vehicle at my home? Do those have the same capabilities? Does my buddy have the same capabilities that I do? So these are all things that you need to be considering. Okay? So say during a local town meeting, you're given the task of equipping yourself and your neighbors with emergency communication, with equipment, SOPs, everything. Mm-hmm. What equipment are you going to suggest for the group? Yeah. How did you choose that equipment? What were your pros and cons? What were the considerations that you thought of? Okay, what SOPs are you going to establish? What SOP is going to be on the top of the list? Okay, think of your context now. Think of your neighbors now. Do you have elderly neighbors? Do you have, political views come into play? Okay, so will your neighbors even care? If you handed your neighbor a gift wrap Pelican case with a radio, 3 batteries, and a laminated SOP sheet, will your neighbor even pick up that radio if it's an emergency? These are things to think about.
So that brings us into the TACCOM consideration here. So say your team or squad is tasked with defending a civilian business during civil unrest or rioting. So how are you going to do your interpersonal team or how are you going to do your inter-team or inter-squad communication? Taking into consideration the programming of emergency services and news channels into that, so you can track the news, so that you can track what's going on. Because a lot of times, if there's rioting, if you're listening to emergency services, they're going to tell you exactly where the rioting is, so you know how close it is to where you're operating. Also, news channels have the eye in the sky as well, so if you're tracking those, you can see exactly what's going on and where and how bad it is. Also, keep in mind, how does your group having radios change the perception of how civilians see you? I mean, if you're rolling around with whip antennas, with cattail antennas, with Peltor headsets on, how are they seeing you? Like, how are you being judged? How are you being evaluated from the standpoint of civilians? Are they going to see you as military? Are they going to see you as militia? Like, how are they seeing you? You need to keep that in mind too, because that could turn into I don't want to mess with them. I don't even want to talk to them. I don't want to relay information to them. I need to get away from them as quick as possible, kind of thing, versus it could end up being, hey, let me test my gun against these guys. You never know how the reaction is going to be, and that's definitely something you need to look into, because that comes down to, oh God, I can't remember who posted it on IG, but it came down to the 3-block war.
I was about to mention that, yeah, by the Nickus of Nicks.
Yes, that was a great read.
Right, so idea being, you and your group are patrolling down one block, right? And all locals are friendly to you. Everybody's
want to do business with you. They wave. They say hi. They
around the corner.
They feed you information.
Right. You go down around the corner, go down another block, and it's half and half. Some people wave. Some people are friendly. Others don't really interact with you. They kind of look at you sideways. Mm-hmm. Others, start to kind of close their doors, go inside. You round the next corner, go down the block. All the kids are gone. People are talking on cell phones, looking in your general direction.
Business closed early.
You have some shady-looking characters start to gather, and they might even take pot shots at you. Start something. I mean, it can be that quick.
It can be.
It can change that quickly from one street to another. So, Perception equals reality. So what do you look like to the locals?
Absolutely.
That's a big thing.
Yeah. In another scenario, so say one of your team members requests a QRF support at his property. Maybe riotings broke out there. Maybe there's someone attempting to gain access to his property, and he doesn't have the firepower to repel them, or doesn't want to risk going into a firefight because his family is there. Does your network have a QRF in place, a quick reaction force? So a group of people willing to jump in their car and go at a moment's notice, because QRF can be the difference between life and death.
It
can be the difference between. It is. It 100% is, and there's so many stories that have come out of Afghanistan about that, where QRF has saved lives, and it continues to do so even today. Anyway, what are your SOPs surrounding how your QRF is organized, how your QRF deploys? Keep that in mind. Does your QRF have a pace plan to contact its members? So say you need to, say the call for a QRF comes in. Does your QRF have the capability to contact all of its members, get organized, and get them rolling at a moment's notice?
What's a Minuteman? The Minutemen were QRF.
Yep.
Right?
They were.
Yeah. So digging into the SOPs a little bit. Okay. So if you're establishing a QRF, are you establishing QRF members on a rotating schedule so they don't get burned out? What are the careers of your members? Do any of your members travel for work? What equipment will your QRF members have at the ready that they'll actually deploy with? Is that standardized? Are what is the overhead for that? Okay, what are your leaders doing to ensure that those things are ready? How do you ensure that those radios are charged if they have radios in their pack? All these things come into play. All these things
you see that a lot too. I've seen a lot of videos pop up across Instagram too of, like, I think they're police forces, dudes rolling up in blue jeans and like polos. Maybe I've even seen a dude roll up with body armor and he was in khaki shorts. Like, these guys are your QRF. Like, you may be in a business suit and you may not have time to change. You're rolling up to the scene in whatever you have on, but your equipment is staged in your place of work. If you can't do that, it's in your car, it's at your home.
You could be
whatever.
You could be on a camping trip or going fishing with your family.
Yeah.
I mean,
and you got to go.
What do you do with your family?
Yeah.
That's
an SOP you need to establish with your family.
Yeah. I mean, and then talking about gear, okay, do you have separate sets of gear for your home and for your vehicle? Or do you have only one set that you have to make sure is with you or around you at any one time? Okay, what if you work at a federal facility or in a hospital, where you can't have, quote unquote, can't have, firearms in the vicinity? Okay, a lot of I mean, seriously though, I mean, these are factors that people need to be thinking of.
Hot tip: just don't tell them. Keep it in your car.
Yeah, but but that is a risk. That's a risk that needs to be, that you need to. Think of.
Take into consideration, yeah, absolutely. So that leads us into reconning contested territory before moving into a member's family, because they're civilians. You got to keep that in mind. They're not going to be used to dealing with this kind of stuff. So if your group doesn't have encryption capabilities, how are you going to keep your comms secure? You got to be able to use encryption tables, use comm windows, brevity codes, call signs, TRPs, target reference points, phase lines. You got to be able to communicate your movement to be able to effectively and safely move these family members. Another thing you got to be able to do is conduct a presence patrol around a member's farm. So, you see that too. People wandering around, walking the fence, like they're conducting a presence patrol. This patrol still has to be able to communicate back. If something happens, they got to be able to radio in that something's going on. They have to radio their last location. A lot of times they will use checkpoints around the farm to be like, okay, well, I just hit the northeast corner, I hit the west corner, what have you, so that people know where they are. Another thing you may see, which has happened before, which would be setting up and maintaining a checkpoints during civil unrest. People man, during the George Floyd riots were going around and just absolutely burning downtowns. What you didn't see, however, that didn't get covered in the news would be people picking up guns to defend these businesses that they didn't want to get burned down. They set up checkpoints. One thing that ended up hitting Seattle was these idiots established what they like to call Chaz or Chop. So it was just a community that I can't even describe this anymore. I would just recommend looking it up. It was just the craziest thing. It was the idea was sound, but the execution was so poorly planned that they basically just liberated a city center and was just like, yes, this is ours now, and people can do whatever they want here. They had armed people there, and say you're stuck in this block. You have family members there that are trapped there. How are you going to communicate with your members who have their families trapped in this area? Like, you got to be able to use radios. You got to be able to establish you got to be able to communicate the plan of how you're going to get those out. So in the case of how are you going to extract these people, say things are getting violent, you see a lot of issues happening. So what are you going to do if you're trying to extract these people, extract this family? As far as communication goes, you're going to want to say you're going in Grayman. You're not rolling a kit. You're not rolling with a plate carrier. You're rolling low key. So that may be a small bag holding more ammo. That may be a small bag holding medical supplies and a weapon. So you're going to want to move as low key as possible. So if that means you're rolling pistol only, keep it hidden. You're going to want a radio. So you're going to want to be able to communicate with the rest of your team. You're going to want to be able to communicate with that family too, to let them know that they're coming in. So that comes down to having radios on hand, especially with that family. So you're going to be communicating as you're going in. You're going to want to be communicating everything that you see. You're going to want to be notating enemy forces, both seen and unseen. If you think that there's going to be an issue, say someone with a gun, communicate that up higher. Again, keep it concise. It would, in this case, be beneficial to have someone on Overwatch. So, especially in the case of Chaz/Chop, I would find a way to utilize fire escapes to get to tops of buildings if you can't get inside of buildings to get to the top, and put someone up there to provide Overwatch, whether that be with a long gun or just with a pair of binoculars, and monitor the movement of the team to the target building and be able to monitor them and provide Overwatch for them on their extraction as well. Because as much as you can plan for things to go completely right, there is a good chance that someone discovers what's going on and they want to be violent. So you have to be able to, at a moment's notice, alter the plan. And to be able to alter the plan, if you're not face to face with someone, you're going to need a radio. So that's what is going to be most commonly utilized to safely extract a family, especially in that situation. You're going to want to monitor them all the way out, and then your Overwatch will have to tear down and leave. Another scenario you may run into would be a team member reporting riot in the city nearest home, and it's spreading to his neck of the woods, the suburbs. That team member may be requesting QRF support and possible extraction. So in that scenario, what are you going to do? Obviously, you're going to have a radio because he's either calling you on a cell phone or he's calling you over the radio. Let's just assume the radio. Let's assume that the cell nets are down. So with rioting is very fluid, as we've noticed. It kind of depends on the whims of those involved and where they're going to go. You got to be able to modify your plan, especially if these riots pick up steam and they're changing direction, changing speed, and moving towards his area a lot more quickly than what was previously established. You could be using your radio to monitor emergency frequencies. You could be monitoring news networks. These are going to be, if you don't have drone support, if you don't have Overwatch in these situations, that's going to be your best bet, knowing how far out, how much time you've got. If you need to pick up the pace with your team moving into that area, you need to be able to relay that to them so that they can pick up the pace and put the pedal to the metal and get there, get them out if they're doing an extraction, or otherwise just get there to show up and set up to be able to protect that area. In any of these cases, if push comes to shove and you find yourself in a firefight, you're going to be reacting to contact. Unfortunately, there is no set rule for every scenario on what's going to happen. It depends entirely on the situation. You may be moving to contact, assaulting through. You may be breaking contact. It entirely depends on the situation you're in, and this is going to come down to whoever's in charge evaluating what information is being put to him, and then making a decision to either, well, we're either going to harden up where we're at, we're either going to assault through and end this fight right now, or we're going to break contact. We're going to get out of here. It entirely depends on the situation. No two situations are exactly alike, and it's going to take some critical thinking, and it's going to take a lot of training, because contact drills are dangerous, especially when the lead's going both ways. So if you are breaking contact, you're going to be bounding out, but communication is key. You know, you got to know when one position's set so the other position can start moving. That way the position that's set can provide overwatch for the other position as they bound back and leave the area. You're going to be throwing smoke, creating distractions. These all have to be communicated, because if you set a distraction or just set a smoke and no one else knows, they may assume that that's the enemy. As far as assaulting through, take a look at some battle drills. It is going to be fluid, but your main thing is going to be suppressive fire, while another team maneuvers to end the threat. They will flank the enemy, and then they will call in that they are moving in on the enemy, and then you'll have a shift fire. We'll talk all about this in a different episode, but we were asked what react to contact would look like, and to be honest with you, it is organized chaos, and it all depends on the situation. One thing does stay the same: communication is king. It prevents accidents, it prevents fratricide, it prevents, honestly, it just prevents casualties. Communication is the difference between everyone going home and mission success, and possibly no one going home and mission failure. In any case, we use comms because the battlefield is always changing. And I don't mean just from a firefight standpoint, although that is part of it. We could be talking about medevac. We could be talking about reacting to natural disasters and helping your fellow man. We could be talking about just communicating even news. Like, we use comms because it's the most effective form of communication when you can't be face to face with someone. Information needs to be relayed as quickly as possible in order for decisions to be made to affect a positive outcome. And above all things, the enemy uses comms, so should you. They use it to monitor responses to actions, they use it to recon, to coordinate assaults, adjust indirect fire, and we use it for the same. We used it in the same way in the military. With the use of comms comes the ability for the enemy to track your location. We saw this in the Ukrainian war. Ukrainian positions were getting shelled because people stayed on the net too long. Same with Russians. This brings up, make sure you're doing check-in times. Make sure you're working ComSec, OPSEC. Use directional antennas to prevent your location from being seen. Have SOPs, have check-in times. Have SOPs for everything. Whether it's check-in windows, whether it's for QRF. Almost everything that we did in the military should and could be used in a civilian context, especially in tactical situations. It's meant to save lives. It's not meant completely to take lives. Our main job in the military was to make sure each other came home safely. Thanks for joining us, everybody. This has been Hard Times, Strong Men. We're sitting here talking communications from the civilian standpoint. We're talking emergency comm and TACCOMM.
You know, this will be an ongoing conversation, guys. Main takeaways we wanted you to have were: you need to set up these SOPs in advance. You need to have you need to think through these things. You need to start getting prepared now, so you're not trying to do this all on the back end. There's so much to consider, and there's so many great resources on IG and elsewhere. Red Bear Tactical, Civil Sentinel, who we're working with on this project. There's so much information. So many people are a wealth of knowledge. But
hit us up. We'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. You know, this is Hard Times, Strong Men. Stay in the fight.
Bye, everybody.